Complaining feels harmless because it provides short-term emotional relief. The brain releases a small reward for expressing frustration, which makes the behavior easier to repeat. But each repetition strengthens neural pathways associated with threat detection rather than opportunity recognition. When you repeatedly verbalize what is wrong, your attention system adapts. It becomes more efficient at spotting obstacles and less sensitive to potential upside. Cognitive bandwidth that could be used for problem solving is redirected towards scanning for confirmation of difficulty. This is not about occasional frustration. Productive reflection can clarify issues and lead to decisions. Chronic complaining, however, keeps the brain in a defensive posture, prioritizing what might go wrong over what could go right. A defensive brain conserves energy. It narrows focus, reduces exploratory thinking, and favors familiar patterns. In financial contexts, this translates into risk avoidance that is not strategic, but reactive. When your internal narrative centers on unfair markets, difficult clients, or impossible systems, agency shifts outward. You begin to interpret outcomes as primarily controlled by external forces. Once agency transfers away from you, initiative weakens. Opportunities rarely announce themselves clearly. They require interpretation, experimentation, and tolerance for uncertainty. A scarcity-trained mind filters them out because uncertainty is processed as threat rather than potential. Over time, this creates a feedback loop. You complain because progress feels limited, and progress feels limited because your attention system has been conditioned to see limits. The loop reinforces itself with every repeated grievance. Financial decision-making depends on perception. Two people can face identical conditions, yet one sees constraint while the other sees leverage. The difference often lies in what their brains have been trained to prioritize. Chronic negativity also alters time horizon. When attention is anchored to immediate discomfort, long-term planning becomes abstract and less compelling. Delayed rewards lose psychological weight compared to present dissatisfaction. This short-term bias affects saving, investing, and skill development. Decisions that require patience feel riskier than they are because the mind is already primed for loss. Fear becomes the default filter. Impulse spending can emerge as a coping response. Small purchases provide immediate emotional relief from a narrative of deprivation. The behavior reinforces the scarcity frame by temporarily masking dissatisfaction instead of resolving it. Risk perception also shifts. Even high-return opportunities may appear disproportionately dangerous when the brain is in threat mode. The result is excessive caution that protects comfort but limits growth. Professional networks reflect internal narratives. People who consistently focus on what is broken tend to attract conversations centered on limitation. Over time, this shapes the information environment, further reducing exposure to constructive ideas. In this state, productivity declines subtly. Energy is consumed by analysis of constraints rather than design of solutions. Effort continues, but it is directed toward managing frustration instead of creating value. The economic cost accumulates gradually. Missed opportunities, delayed decisions, and conservative positioning compound over years. What began as harmless venting becomes a structural disadvantage. Interrupting this pattern requires awareness at the moment a complaint forms. The key is not suppression, but redirection. When a negative observation arises, the brain must be prompted to identify a controllable variable within the same context. This shift restores agency. By asking what can be influenced rather than who is to blame, attention moves from threat detection to problem solving. Neural pathways associated with exploration strengthen with repetition. Gratitude functions as a deliberate counterweight. It is not denial of difficulty, but recognition of existing assets and options. Regularly identifying resources trains the brain to register opportunity with greater sensitivity. As the attention system recalibrates, perception changes. Obstacles are still visible, but they are no longer the dominant signal. The mind begins to scan for leverage points instead of confirmation of scarcity. A solution-oriented narrative increases engagement with complex tasks. Uncertainty becomes information to evaluate rather than danger to avoid. Over time, this expands the range of considered actions. Value creation depends on this expanded range. When attention includes possibility alongside constraint, strategic decisions improve. The probability of identifying profitable moves rises. The transition from chronic complainer to disciplined observer is gradual. Each redirected thought slightly adjusts neural weighting. Consistency compounds, just as financial returns do. The central mechanism remains the same. Chronic complaining reinforces a scarcity mindset that trains the brain to focus on obstacles rather than opportunities. That training directly shapes financial behavior and, eventually, economic outcomes. Wealth is not determined by optimism alone. It is influenced by what your brain has been conditioned to notice. Change what you reinforce, and you change what you are capable of seeing. Want to see the hidden rules shaping money, power, and human behavior? Subscribe to Unseen Forces.